Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Life Chronicles and Deep Dives podcast. I'm here with Coach Cornelia, all the way in Romania.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our podcast.
And I am Coach Micah Ranjit. Today, on this episode, we're going to be talking about building emotional intimacy and the act of judging.
What emotional intimacy means?
So, emotional intimacy is a little bit beyond physical intimacy. So, emotional intimacy is about building and sharing trust with your partner, being vulnerable, open, and establishing connection through communication.
Right. That sounds pretty hard to achieve. It's a lot of work,
Yes,
right?
it is absolutely a lot of work, and there's books and articles on like how to achieve emotional intimacy with your partner, how to work on it. In fact, I think it's something that you continuously work on building with your partner, because through life you'll have your ups and your downs, and you need to be able to be vulnerable. You need to be able to have that communication and share that connection with your partner. And this could be a friend too. I mean, it doesn't have to be a partner, but by building that emotional intimacy, that person feels safe and supported interacting with you. So that it's like building a sphere around your relationship, like a little protective bubble, right? And with that, it's a lot more fulfilling, because like a lot of relationships, they're just surface level. That's like the person that you see at the coffee shop or the friend that you go to the gym with. And in some degrees, or you that you see at the gym, in some degrees, like those have a little bit of emotional connection, but in reality, those are just people that you recognize, right? Real emotional connection. Those are like your close friends that you're sharing your secrets with, that you're being vulnerable with. In some cases, you're crying with, right? That you can tell the truth to without fear, right? Because being supported and feeling safe is what's going to build that connection and that trust between those two people.
Right. And I was thinking while you were talking that it's like let's think about someone who's having a relationship for the first time and does everything, but ends up suffering. Let's say the person suffers again and again and again. Do you think they might be still able to build this emotional intimacy after suffering a few times?
So there's a couple of things, right, with that, right? So like let's say if you're engaged with somebody that is a manipulator, a narcissist, or somebody with like a personality disorder that's like a taker, a predatory personality. If you're being emotionally intimate with them, it's not your fault, right? So it's not anybody's fault that they were emotionally intimate with them.
Right.
You that's what's supposed to happen in a relationship, right? The problem stems from the abuse that happens during those relationships. So once those relationships happen, the abuse kind of like wears down the other person, and then they lose their ability to be emotionally intimate with other people, right? So it breaks it down to the point where they lose their sense of self, then they lose their sense of trust, and then they can't trust anybody else, right? So being emotionally intimate for them is very, very hard. You'll hear the term that you said it, they put up walls, right, to protect themselves from this, right? Now, in order to break down those barriers, right, it takes little steps. So little steps at a time, but you have to be doing them with the right person, right? And you have to
Mm,
want to break those barriers down, because in some cases, like you could get into a relationship, you get into a problem, and then keep doing the same thing, right? And at some point, if if the person's following the same pattern and going into the same predatory relationship after the next, they're not doing internal work to learn. They're not being emotionally intimate with themselves, let alone somebody else. So this is like the key takeaway. yes, they can work towards it, but they have to work towards being emotionally intimate and truthful within themselves first in order to carry that outward into a relationship. You've heard the saying where, like, if somebody's happy on the inside, they have a happy relationship, right? If
Mm,
somebody's negative on the inside, they're sad, they're depressed, or they're angry on the inside, then that's how they project out into the world. So what's within you is what you project outward.
all right. So, okay, let's go back to the first question. What is emotional intimacy? And let's go to the next question coming up. How can you build this emotional intimacy with a partner or with a friend or a family member? Or
So, yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. It does happen romantic, platonic, and familiar relations, right? So, it's the ability to like just share deep emotions, deep connection, right? And it's through that vulnerability, building that trust that it happens. That can be active listening, right? It could just be sitting there. We learned about this in our life coaching course where we're just sitting with the client. Now, we're not building emotional intimacy with the client, but simulated that uh, it does build that. Being vulnerable, so being open, being willing to tell the truth, being willing to share the truth, even if it is painful. And it may take time to break down that wall to be able to do that, but being able to share that with empathy, right? So that's a key component here, is like having empathy and being
yeah,
willing to be open to that in both directions. Emotional validation. And one thing that you mentioned earlier was healthy boundaries, right? So when a person enters into a relationship, uh, they set a boundary, like this is what the expectation for the relationship is, right? Like, okay, this is a romantic, this is a platonic relationship, whatever it is. And then they set boundaries for themselves. Boundaries aren't for other people, it's for within themselves, right? But they're able to share those boundaries with that partner. And so the partner learns about that vulnerability, and then that trust and strength builds more.
right. I would like to add the fact that you said something about active listening,
Mhm.
and I want to add that it's listening to understand the person, not bringing a solution, not coming up with ideas or advice, just understand the other. And I think this might be a really big plus for any relationship. Really truly understanding how the other is feeling, when, like you said, emotional validation, when you recognize the emotions and you understand the situation. That's my take on this one. But also I think that in order to build emotional intimacy, we have to know yourself pretty good and introspect on how you want the relation going. But at the same time, you have to fix your inner problems so that you won't be very dependable on the partner when it comes to emotional needs, right? Because you can become a burden at one point.
Building emotional intimacy is about building that connection. However, it is not about being codependent. So you're right. Yeah,
Mm,
we don't want to become that emotional validation sponge with the other person where we're both just absorbing off of each other. There was a poem that was out, and I don't remember who wrote it, but I do remember seeing it. And it was about two trees that grow next to each other, right? So the trees are growing next to each other, and they're both sharing the same sun, right? They're both sharing around the same land. But as the trees grow, they have to make sure that their branches don't become intertwined too much, right? So they're next to each other. They're walking hand in hand, or branch and branch in this case, right? But
yeah,
if their branches become intertwined too much, right? And one tree starts to overshadow the other, like let's say the other one like suffocates the other, or if the other one doesn't get enough sun, right, then one tree will wither and die and one tree doesn't, right? So that's part of the building emotional intimacy, is about finding balance in that connection as well.
Yeah, that's a great example, Mike, actually. But unfortunately, the reality of life is that it's very hard, almost impossible to get to a balance like that, right? It takes a lot of work, and I don't think there's so many people willing to do it.
Well, there are several workshops out. So, like, there are a lot of workshops that develop this. There's books that like have prompts that'll like help people work towards that emotional intimacy connection. Like, I mean, so, and I've talked about it as like being open, being vulnerable, being an active listener. I mean, it can be small things as identifying your partner or whoever it is that you're trying to interact with, their love languages, and speaking to those, right? That builds emotional intimacy. The fact that you've put in enough effort to research or like learn about the other person's love language and then to act on that is several steps of building emotional intimacy. So, I mean, there's several ways to do it. It is hard to do. So, like, building that connection and being vulnerable is probably going to be the hardest part, right? Because those walls have to come down. The active listening, people can sit there and listen, right? Having empathy, most people have empathy, right? Um, Giving emotional validation, right? So sharing in experiences, that happens.
Yeah,
Establishing the boundaries, those things happens. But the hard part is like that being vulnerable, right? Because uh and we've talked about this off podcast, but like having vulnerabilities, right, can trigger people into like defense, right? So like when they get triggered into defense, then that shuts down that pathway to emotional intimacy. So it's important for people to identify those barriers
mm,
and try to work with themselves, right? Remember, we got to be within ourselves, positive and ready to go and available for emotional intimacy in order to receive it as well.
right. So, do you think that relationship can work if someone is not doing this?
So I think it depends, right? So you pointed out that a relationship like sets boundaries or sets like a goal from the beginning, right? So like let's say if my goal is to date somebody and then get married, have kids and have a family and move on, and live happily ever after. Well, that would entail, right, having emotional intimacy. Where we start to not see that is in relationships where they become transactional. And, some people like transactional relationships. And so that's where that emotional intimacy kind of like takes a backseat to more physical intimacy or, physical acts. I mean, they're still speaking to each other's different languages, love languages, just not as deeply emotional as they could, right? So like there'll be more intimacy, there'll be more gift giving, more money, like out to eat, more tangible uh gift giving and tangible objects, tangible transactions versus emotional intimacy in that kind of relationship. But they can work. They can work.
Oh, that's good news. You're talking about active listening your partner.
Yes.
What does it exactly mean?
So active listening would be to hear something, right? Be able to again understand it, as you said, but then also be able to repeat it back in a way that you understand it.
I felt it with my daughter. Um, Sometimes we grown-ups are very busy with our lives, and let's say we are working, I'm writing something, let's say I'm writing something, and my daughter comes here and says something, and I'm not hearing what she's saying because I'm very concentrated with my work. I'm not sure how the grown-ups see this, but the kids are feeling it. And she's telling me,
Right.
you haven't heard me, mom, right? And I said, yes,
Right.
yes, I've heard everything. She said, no, you haven't. So that's the opposite of active listening, right?
Right. So I mean, in that case, you're like, it's distracted listening, right? So it's not
Mm.
even like full blown listening, and everyone is guilty. Like, I mean, nobody is actively listening all the time. Somebody, like you're busy, you got a day, like you're working on something, you're driving your car, right? But in certain instances, that active listening, emotional intimacy, is important to have. So if you're having a real strong conversation, a deep conversation, or even if you're on a date, having that emotional intimacy is tantamount to like building a good relationship. Case in point, everyone has cell phones now. So a lot of times when people, even friends, are going out on dates, they're all looking down at their cell phones and they're not really talking to each other. So the friendships aren't as strong, right, as they used to be. There's not as much emotional intimacy in those platonic relationships. Even familial relationships are suffering because of, the youth are more involved electronically in the technology, and they're not actively involved with the family so as much, right? Now, um, open and honest communication is probably going to be like that big push, right? Because like we've talked about the vulnerability and the active listening, right? So that, put those together and you've got open and honest communication. All relationships have to have that. So they're
You said something, and I want to continue a little bit on it. Just asking
yeah.
you about. So you've talked about technology and how it affects our lives. Of course, we are not. We don't have the same attention span. That's for sure. So how do you deal with that in a relationship when you want to build emotional intimacy and you want to build a good relationship, but at the same time we are all a little bit dependent on technology, right?
Okay, so the small steps, right? So if we're in a family or if I'm in a relationship that has like a high tech, like they always got phones in their hands, right? Small things like not having phones at the dinner table, even if you're out to eat, right? Not having, having time where we're sitting down talking. It could be like games or prompts where we're actively talking to other parties, right? So, like, let's say if me and my fiance are at the dinner table, we don't bring our phones to the dinner table, right? Um, it could be something where we're sitting in the living room and we're just talking to each other on the couch without the TV on, right?
Mm.
Or we do stuff outside, right? If it's a situation that requires a lot of attention, right? That's when we listen. We actively listen. We're sitting there, we're responding, we're paying attention, right?
Mm.
We're open, we're being honest, right? How to bring more of that in is to spend more time actively engaged with that person you're trying to build the connection with, right? So let's say if we take 10% of our time that we have throughout the day allotted that we're using our phone. Now, let's say if we take that 10% of that time and we put it now towards being emotionally intimate with our partner, right? Do you think our relationship will increase? Well, of course, because we're spending 10% more time of the day being emotionally intimate with our partner, right? Versus interacting with our phone. So that's an easy way is like you can take a percentage of time that you're active on your phone. Most phones will tell you that, how long you've been active for each day. Take a percentage off of that, reallot that towards your partner, or, small steps like not having phones at the dinner table, doing stuff outside together can also be really, really great.
One more thing I wanted to say is that first and foremost, it takes two to do everything we've talked about until now, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's important to remember that emotional intimacy is a journey, not a destination. That's kind of a cliche way to put it, but it is a journey because you're constantly working on it and building it with your partner versus just something you do once in a while, right? If you want that lasting long-term relationship, that open communication, that vulnerability, the active listening, all of those things are going to be there, and they're going to have to be there throughout the relationship in order to keep it healthy.
Absolutely.
Investing in that emotional intimacy will definitely lead to more fulfilling relationships.
Right.
All right, so let's move into topic 2, the act of judgment. Cornelia, you want to take this one away?
I would very much like to. And first of all, I want to start with a small definition about it, not very long one. What is the act of judgment? What is a judgment? A judgment is an opinion, right? Or an opinion one has about, in this case, other people. That's what I want to talk about, not situations, just other people. And therefore, being an opinion, it's not rational, it's irrational, because it mostly depends on one's experiences with the world, or how they grew up, and what principles they have in life. So having an opinion is very relative, like we were talking about relativity in one of our podcasts. So it's very relative. So this is why it's an irrational act.
So, like, what's the difference between making a healthy judgment and unhealthy judgment, or are they all unhealthy because they're all irrational?
If you think about psychology, all the judgments are wrong behaviors. So it's not a good thing to judge others. But in my opinion, is we are allowed to judge when we are directly affected by a behavior. It's the only situation when I think we are allowed to judge. Otherwise, we should just mind our business. uh, when people are judging others, they're trying to establish a hierarchy, um, to I'm better than you, I'm superior to you. So that's the main thing. And it's very hard to change this thing because it's very deeply ingrained in our human nature to judge others. Although we have, I mean, it's in Bible, it's in Quran, and it's in every religious book in the world. It says do not judge, but it's something that human nature does all the time.
I mean, you're right. Human brains are wired to judge. They evaluate and they categorize like people, objects, situations, and experiences all together.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's you can explain this love for judgment in two ways. It's first might be attribution, which means that one is trying to put the blame on someone else for its own behaviors. So that's when we are trying to make someone else to pay, let's say, for our bad behaviors. And the other one is projection. In psychology is a theory that says that we see in the others only what we have inside of ourselves. It's something I really don't agree with. But projection might appear in many times. It is projection when one is judging someone else. It might, and it takes to introspection. You might want to ask yourself, why am I seeing this behavior in the other person? Is it something with me or not? It's a good way to introspect yourself and to find out a lot of things about you. But at the same time, you are allowed to judge sometimes when you're directly affected. So I don't think it's only projection.
So you talked about like judging, right? When people are directly affected by, like a situation, another person, right? What kind of behavior patterns are you looking at when you make that judgment? So, like you say, you're allowed to judge, right? So what behavior patterns would you see that would cause you to judge somebody?
I'm not even thinking about patterns. I'm thinking about being affected by, let's say, a family member's behavior, right? It might not bother the other members of the family, but it might bother this particular member. And this particular member of the family goes to the member who is having that behavior and says, "I'm. It hurts me when you're doing this." And it says it for once, twice, three times, and the other one is not changing the behavior. The person doesn't care about it. So that's where I say you can judge that person, you can trust them, just don't care about it. As long as they don't care about how you feel, you can judge them for that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense because like they've established that they're going to continue to do what they're going to do. So that opinion formulates, and then you're judging them based off of that behavior, which is totally acceptable to have like so judgment in creating like healthy boundaries is probably, a safe bet. So, how do we make a difference between establishing like a healthy boundary through judgment of another person and criticizing somebody else through judgment? How do we make a distinction between the two?
When we think about criticizing the others, is that some we don't like something about them, right? They are not doing something according to how we see things. So then we go and say, "You're not doing this well. You have to do it like me, or you have to change something." That's criticizing. Judging for me is really imagine like a trial where you put that person that hurt this family member. So one family member is hurting because another of another family member, right? And as I was saying, it keeps asking him, "Can you please not do this because it hurts me?" And the other one is not stopping. Then you, I think that family member needs to be put on trial. Like you can think about it in a metaphorical way, right?
Right.
So it's trial. You've done this, you've done that. You heard me here, you heard me there. That's not criticizing. This is just judging the facts. Do you agree that we are allowed to judge uh, the ones that directly affect us?
So, I think that we do it, right? I think that it is inevitable that the human will judge another human that's directly affecting us, right? Um, do I think it's right? I'm not sure I'm the person to say that it's right or wrong for that other person. For me personally, like if I'm going, let's say if I take your experience where I go to somebody and I tell them they're hurting me, they're hurting me, they're hurting me. They continue to do that, right? Now I'm formulating an opinion of them in my head, right? A perception of that reality. I'm taking my experience, right? I'm taking that all to that metaphorical court and I'm judging them based off of what they're doing, right? So then I take that information and then I establish the boundary. Okay, I'm not going to engage with that person. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to move forward with that kind of communication. Reason being is because if I stay in that negative space where I've judged that person and then I hold that grudge against them, right? I know that they will continue this pattern. But if I stay in a place where they can continue that pattern and I don't remove myself, then I'm just as much to blame. And they are probably reverse judging or judging backwards and saying, okay, well, that person is just staying here and keep like it's allowing this to happen. Right. So that's where that healthy boundary comes into play. So you remove yourself from the situation and then you'll have a peaceful life. You can still hold on to that judgment of who that person is, but you don't need to hold on to the stress once you move forward and move away. That's my thought on
Yeah,
judging.
Yeah, judging others might be stressful. That's true. And
Yeah.
in general, talking about judgment, it's not healthy for the ones that are judged and for the ones that are judging. So it's not healthy. It comes with a lot of anxiety, stress. For the ones that are judging, it takes a lot of time, and sometimes I'm wondering, I mean, don't you have anything else to do? I mean, don't you have some activities or something? Just keep watching the others and judging them all the time. But why am I saying that we have to judge? You have to make them responsible for what they're doing, right? So you're telling them
Well,
you
you're holding them accountable, right? Yeah.
have to hold them accountable. Many times the abusers are getting away with it, right? Just because we decide we're gonna shut up and change our behavior. Maybe it's the healthiest thing to do. At the same time, and I'm teaching my daughter to confront their abusers. And this is one way of confronting the abusers, judging them, even in front of the others, trashing them sometimes. You know, in psychology, someone is having a rant and you just go there and slap them. So it's a shock, and in that moment, that behavior stops.
Hmm.
So it's kind of the same with the judgment here. Someone keeps doing bad things to the others, and at one point, someone has to come up and judge them, put them on trial, in even in front of the others, and say, "You, it has to stop." That's
Yeah.
where,
So like calling them out, right?
right, exactly. So that's where I'm saying that judgment is allowed, and it's necessary, also necessary.
Absolutely. Let's talk about some unhealthy forms of judgment, like being overly critical, right? There's one thing to be said for constructive criticism, right? But being overly critical, labeling or making assumptions, and comparing ourselves to others. So let's talk about that a little bit. Being overly critical, right? So you'll see this in abuse cycles, right? Where an abuser is overly critical constantly, right? We've both experienced this where they both like, you know, it's constant criticism, right? Destroys self-esteem, whittles it away. Um, Labeling and making assumptions. So this would be it if you were walking down the street and you do not know somebody, you've never interacted with them before, right? And you look at them and then your brain makes a judgment. Now, why does that happen? Now, we're going to talk about this because this is important. Our brains are designed to pass judgment. They're designed to categorize and evaluate each situation, each person, right? The problem is that when we encounter something that looks similar or moves similar or is similar to a previous negative experience, right? So our brain automatically applies that negative experience to this person rather than a blank slate. It's almost impossible for our bodies and minds in our stress response to not see that as a negative thing, right? In order to do that, realize that we're making that judgment, peel back the layers a little bit, and then kind of come at it from a blank slate. Now, if they're starting to check all the boxes and then, you know, like they start doing stuff to you, then they fall into that category for that negative response to get your butt out of there. But until then, if we're just looking at somebody, even if they look, behave, and act similar to a previous negative person or situation, we have to drop that bias. I mean, that's like the hard part, is that's
That's
like the unhealthy part.
that's called interpretation or thoughts interpretation. And I've been in this situation. I've done this stupid thing. I went into a store one time, and the seller there was not interested in the clients. I went there and I said, "Why are you behaving like this? I asked you this and this, and you didn't help me." And she said, "My father just died." And for me, it was the biggest lesson in my life in not interpreting things according to, I don't know, what ideas I have or principles I have or whatever. And that was the biggest lesson. And I'm trying so hard. It's not always that I'm managing this, but I'm trying so hard not to judge anyone. I've been a victim, let's say, of this kind of judgment. I'm not antisocial, but I'm very, how should I put it? I'm very careful with people. And I have a lot of things on my mind. Usually, I'm thinking a lot about many things. So I'm having many thoughts, and I'm busy with those thoughts all the time. And when I was in college, I remember after the first year, I I finally became friends with two of the girls in my class, and they told me, we thought you are very annoying, arrogant, antisocial, and so on, but you're not like that. And it's a huge difference between these two, how we saw you in the first year and how you really are now when we became friends. And that's something that followed me through my life. It happens even now when I'm not very talkative. I don't really interact with people too much if they don't invite me. So I'm not going there and be very extrovert and so on. And many of them judge me by that, saying that I'm maybe arrogant, while I'm just minding my own business. That's how I am. And it takes me a very long time to come closer to people. They say the same thing usually until they get to know me. So did you meet this kind of behavior in your life?
Absolutely. So, I don't smile a lot. I'm pretty muscularly built, and I walk. I guess I've been told I walk aggressively, not fast, but just I carry a lot of presence.
Mm-hmm.
So, because of that, I've been told that I look mean, that I look unapproachable, that I've actually been told quite a few times that I look like a criminal first, which I'm not. And like the thing is I don't activate a lot of emotions right up front. I'm actually kind of like sitting and I'm just kind of like I'm waiting, right? I'm a blank slate. We talked about this on the last podcast. I'm a blank slate until you interact with me.
Yeah.
Once they interact with me, whatever they bring to the table, that's what I mirror back to them. So if they're being short and abrasive, they get short and abrasive back. If they're getting long and sarcastic, they're getting long and sarcastic back. Funny, and obviously I'm bringing myself to the table, but I'm mirroring their body language, I'm mirroring their mannerisms and their speech patterns. And um, so up until that point, people look at me, and until they talk to me, I'll find a lot of people judge me without even knowing me. So there's a lot of things that they don't know about me, but they judge me. And I've been part of a smear campaign. I've been smeared. So I've got people that don't even know me that hate my guts. You know what I mean? That's interesting. But it's just kind of it's part of life, right? And so that is what they're kind of doing, is like they're judging me based off of what somebody else has said or what their eyes are telling them, not actually who I am, right? And so yeah, that's definitely an experience that I get on a daily basis when I'm out in town. So it can be quite interesting. The good news is I don't get a lot of people coming up to me trying to sell me stuff. So there is a plus side to that. Um, I wanted to talk about one other form of like unhealthy judgment, and that is like comparing ourselves to others or like internally judging ourselves. So, I know you had something you wanted to say about that.
Being someone who's been raised feeling guilty all the time and blamed for many things, I came to the conclusion, and I'm still judging myself now, but theoretically, I know that it's not the right thing to do. That's maybe one of the most toxic things we can do regarding our own persona. judging ourselves. Of course we have to introspect. Of course we have to identify some behaviors maybe we didn't know about, and change those behaviors, so if we decide that it's the right thing to do. But judging ourselves in an ungrateful manner, or in a not very gentle manner, that's the worst thing we can do. Comparing ourselves to others, another big mistake, um, because the beauty of life is that each and every one of us is unique, right? So why would we compare ourselves to others? At the same time, judging ourselves. People make mistakes, Micah, right? We make mistakes
Absolutely.
every day. So where I'm judging myself is when I'm persisting with the same mistake, when I know that I made these mistakes, and then I'm doing those mistakes again. That's when I'm judging myself. But until that point, we can just be gentle with ourselves, understand our mistakes, love ourselves more, and give up on this judgmental, guilty thing that is really indeed very toxic for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people that experience that internal judgment, and I've been one of them, right? So, like after narcissistic abuse, I was internally judging myself. There's a lot of shame and guilt involved in like the abuse cycle. But then I kind of took a step back and I peeled back the onion layers and I kind of like looked at it and I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I judging myself so hard for something that I didn't know? Right.
Right.
And so I looked at that, and then, the one thing I did start to do is while I was doing that, I started to flip it around. I started to kind of like look at myself, and I was like, wait a minute, what are things I did do that I knew happened, right? I was able to pick up on betrayal and deception through body language cues and
Mm,
speech patterns, right? Like I was able to do that, right? So instead of, and that's how I kind of crawled myself out of that, like judgment of like, how did I let this happen? Why would I stay with this, right? And then I started to look at the positives, right? Um, and we're gonna switch off of that, and we're gonna go to like comparing ourselves to others, right? So like in judgment, right? If I am comparing myself to other people on a constant basis, I'm constantly in competition with somebody else. That's not
right.
myself, right? And they may not even know that they're in competition with me, but what that does is that builds like resentments between two people that can build like, a negative competition, and then that increases the chance of us projecting negative, emotions and states onto that person, right? And they may not even know that we're doing it, but because we've compared ourselves to them, like that person has more money than me, that person's
Mm,
prettier than me, right? That person's got more muscles, that person's whatever, right? As soon as we start doing that, we're building a negative mindset through envy and judgment rather than cultivating a growth mindset through mindful practices and, like education and building ourselves up and increasing our confidence. So I definitely think staying away from like unhealthy judgments is best. And I think that's probably what, like the Bible is talking about when they talk about not judging others. Um, it can definitely lead to a lot of self doubt and anxiety and low self esteem if we're doing those things. So we definitely want to stay away from them.
and it goes for the both sides, for the judged ones and for the ones that are judging. The self-esteem goes down, the confidence, um, they become more anxious, more stressed. And for the judged one or bullied ones, because judgment can, the unhealthy judgment can take us to bullying. It goes hand in hand. It can lead to really, I don't want to say it here, but it can lead to really bad things for the ones that are bullied. And we have so many thousands of studies showing that the ones that are judged, criticized, bullied, they get in really bad places from many points of view, mentally, emotionally, maybe unaliving themselves and so on. So we
Right.
have
So
to,
let's talk about that.
yeah,
Right. So you just brought up a good point. Like, so like these judgments, right, that like these negative ones, and I don't want to stay here on negative, but I did want to bring up this one last point about this,
uh,
is that these negative judgments, like if we're passing, like if we're judging other people and we're bullying other people, right? Let's
mhm,
swing this back to the other part of that negative, right? Let's say if we're judging ourselves too harshly, right? So we got to be like, I mean, we even had I think a section in our life coaching session that was like, be careful of your inner critic or something like that. But yeah, we got to be careful that we aren't judging ourselves, because if we're bullying other people because we're judging them, or I mean, that is like just like a figurative statement, but like if that's happening, right? Imagine what that judgment does to ourselves. So just trying to refrain from those things, challenging those negative thoughts, practicing that empathy and understanding, hopefully to try to build better relationships rather than negative relationships.
right. Yeah, you said a word, that's empathy. This is something that might help us change this judgment thing a little bit, being more empathetic, trying to restrain yourself from drawing conclusions. We should be more self-aware and say, okay, I'm stopping here. I'm just, if you get to know that person, I'm gonna get to know this person. You have to be curious about it. You have to be willing to find things about that person, to know that person. And for me, learning this at one point was very fulfilling, because it gave me such a great occasion to meet great people, which I thought they were not very nice persons or whatever. So it was a win-win situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Swinging back all the way to the beginning of the conversation, I know we're a long way. We've talked about negative, and looking at people and judging other people, but having that empathy to, like get to know somebody new, right? Instead of judging them based off of, what they look like or how they're behaving. If it's even if it's based off a negative experience, they're a completely different person.
Sure.
Where that doesn't play in is when you know the person, right? So like let's say if you were walking down the street and you see somebody that you know, that same person that you've asked to stop doing things negative to you, right, over and over again, and they still don't do it, right? They don't respect you to do it, and then they're probably judging you that, like you're still accepting it, right? And they're coming towards you, right? They're coming towards, we're like walking that direction, right? Now in that case, it's okay to make that judgment, right? And I'm guilty of this. So like I will assume the best in people, right? And so I will, even if they've been negative to me, even if they've hurt me in the past, right? I will assume that this interaction is going to be different, that they may have changed, that they may have seen the light. Maybe I've told them the truth. Maybe they're open to discussion, right? I have to be aware that, and that challenges my safety, right? I have to be aware that when I'm seeing that person, or let's say in your case, when you're seeing this person, that they did do those things, and it's okay to have that judgment to set the boundary, right? So the judgment is actually like an opinion that you formulated in your head about this individual. The boundary, the good, the healthy part that comes about from that is removing yourself from the situation, getting that self compassion and being able to stay safe, stay away from that, and not interact with a person that will do that again.
It's a great example, but maybe I will choose a behavior of avoiding that person, right? And of course, we have to change our behaviors and try to avoid these bad situations for us. But at the same time, for me, what I feel about my ex-abusers is that it's like a duty to call out that person. Maybe me calling out that person will make at least a small change in that person's behavior, and uh, maybe because of that, some people won't be hurt like I've been. So this is why I insist so much on judging them, trashing them saying what you have to say about it. That shocking treatment we've talked about in psychology, shocking them. Maybe they make a small change and won't do the same mistakes with other people. That's why I'm very willing to judge the ones that affect me directly.
I get the calling them out. So like in most cases, if I'm avoiding somebody, I've already called them out, right? Either directly or indirectly. I've already done that, right? So like if I see somebody coming towards me and I know that they've done negative things, right? I know myself enough to know that I stood up for myself and said, "Hey, you did this wrong to me, right? You're like treating me this way, right? Or you said this about me, right? That's not true, right?" Um, I know that about myself is that I will present that and then I will avoid them, right?
Yeah, of
So, yeah,
course, yes, that's the order exactly.
yeah,
So not avoiding from the first moment. You need to call them out, and
yeah,
then you
absolutely.
yeah.
In some cases, I'm going to throw this out there just as like kind of a disclaimer. Calling out a narcissist can be very dangerous. I've done it, and so is Cornelia, and it can put you it can get you a big target in a lot of ways.
I mean,
But
for me, you can even think about being in physical danger.
oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like you see this whole thing play out, and for that individual, they have been judged, right? So like now there's avoidance, right? I have no interest in that individual. I have no interest in talking or seeing or being around or hearing or anything. The only
But
interest I have is the lessons that I learned
mm,
in order to grow from it, right? So I still tell my story because it's empowering. I still tell, I still research and study. And because of that, I'm able to help other people.
yeah, for me, if I were to report of one specific relationship, I'm still judging them when I have the will to do it or the need to do it with my friends. I'm gossiping, I'm judging, I'm calling that person names and whatever, so that I can get rid of this uh, garbage that I feel that I still have inside after so many years. It still affects me, and yeah, I'm still judging them all day long if I want to. It's my right to do it.
Yeah, that is one thing that I will advocate for is that if somebody has been abusive to you in the past, and that could be anybody, you, Cornelia, anybody watching this podcast. If somebody's been abusive to you, it's okay to judge them. It's okay to call them out if it's safe to call them out. And it's okay to avoid them, to stay there and stay away, to set those boundaries and to not engage with them at all. So, like, that's totally reasonable.
If you've met an abuser and that abuser abused you many times in many ways, emotional, physical, it doesn't matter, abused you, and you've been talking to the abuser, trying to talk to the abuser about it, saying how it affects you and so on, and they kept abusing you, you have all the rights in the world to trust them, judge them, and say whatever you want about them all for the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
That's
It's
what I.
true, right? So like I think I've said this to you, right? And it's one of my favorite taglines, right? If and it's on my website. If they didn't want it to be the truth, they wouldn't have done it. I'm glad that everyone has been here for this episode 6 of this podcast. Look, we're already creeping up on 10 here soon. And
Yeah.
I have hope that we have a lot more stuff coming up for you. If you have any questions for either one of us, you can leave a question in the comment section below. You can hit us up on each of our websites. Those are linked in the description box as well. And we'll see you next time.